Hello, I am Unknown Riddle, and this is my first video for the channel. I will be upfront with you all right now and say that this video won't be the standard type this channel uploads. Undertale and Deltarune are my favorite games, and I wanted to put my ideas out there before Deltarune's chapters 3 and 4 drop. That is why this one-off video is my first. With that, I can get into the topic: Parallel Timeline Theory. Parallel timelines and alternate universes have always been fascinating to me. I love seeing how the smallest change can lead to a different future. In my media consumption, whenever these topics come up, what catches my attention the most is when certain events or actions from the main timeline are referenced or mirrored at the same point in time, when the point of change between them would make it unlikely for such things to align so cleanly. Like every Spider-Man getting the iconic responsibility speech, even in universes where Uncle Ben isn't around to give it. This is possible because they are works of fiction, and the creators can make it so. My theory applies this to Undertale and Deltarune. I believe the timelines of both games align so closely they can be used to make educated guesses about one another. Examples of what I mean are examples such as the characters being the same age at the same point in time, events in one's being paralleled or mirrored in the other. This is possible because the creator Toby Fox can make it so. I believe he did, not only for the sake of including Easter eggs for the fans, but also to make it easier for him to develop the setting of Deltarune. It was the process behind this that led to the creation of parallel timeline theory. I will not only be going through the timelines of both games, but I will also be including my own personal theories and findings. This will culminate in my own explanation for Gaster, the Knight, and Deltarune as a whole, using the information gleaned from this exercise. Let's not waste any time and jump in.
Part 0. Alternate Universe or Simulation.
Before we can even start, we have to determine Deltarune's relationship to Undertale, as the rest of this video is built on the conclusion I myself came to. The first step is determining whether the world within Deltarune is even real or not. An initial theory I had shortly after the game first came out is that the world of Deltarune is just a simulation being run by the entity guiding us through the vessel creation menu at the start of the game. The rationale for this came from the fact that the entity took over Toby Fox's Twitter account shortly before the game dropped and reached out to fans to bring them into a survey and quote,
"Using your responses, we will approach its realization."
It's, presumably being Deltarune. When you first open the game, it has the name Survey Program. The implication to me indicated that the game was just a simulation for the entity to observe our interaction and choices in the game. However, it was pointed out to me later that Flowey took over the account in a similar vein around the release of Undertale's demo, and as far as I could find, Flowey isn't a fourth wall breaker capable of perceiving the real world in the actual game. The closest he comes is after a pacifist run, when you boot up the game again. He will appear and implore you not to reset and to let Frisk live their life. While this seems like damning evidence, he refers to the person he's speaking to as whatever you name the first human. The name isn't in quotation marks either, indicating that he's not sarcastically using it as a placeholder for someone he doesn't know. At most, he's aware that Frisk's determination may not be their own and is attributing it to Kara. All this to say that taking over the Twitter is likely only to drum up hype for the game and is not part of the actual canon. Furthermore, if Deltarune is just a simulation created by a fictional character, why would he need to further interfere with the characters he created and programmed in order to set them up as secret bosses, instead of just making them such in the first place? That strikes me as actions done to manipulate the pieces of an already existing world into place for a story or experiment to play out. I'll touch on this more, as we're still focused on the world itself and not the mysterious entity. Lastly, Toby Fox has stated that Deltarune should be viewed separately from Undertale, in that it's not a continuation or directly impacted by the story of Undertale. Being a simulation in the universe would imply it being the direct creation of someone who is part of the Undertale world, which would conflict with the previous statement. We can conclude from all this that the world of Deltarune is a separate world on the same level of fictional existence as Undertale. And given both worlds share versions of the same characters, it can be assumed that Deltarune is an alternate universe. From here, we could finally start the timeline. These universes separate almost immediately, as the most likely point of divergence will be in the second point in the timeline.
Part 1. Humans and Monsters.
The earliest point in time we know of is that humans and monsters coexisted on the surface at some point in the distant past. At least centuries ago, judging by the first image of a human we see in the intro of Undertale wielding a spear. So this will be the start of our timeline. The second point on our timeline is the human-monster war. The glyphs and waterfall give us more context for this event beyond the little given to us in the intro. Humans are much stronger than monsters thanks to their souls. Human souls are strong enough to persist after death, while monster souls disappear post-mortem. It would take almost every single monster soul just to equal a single human soul. However, the ability to persist after death is also the one weakness of humans. If one could be killed, a monster could absorb it to gain incredible power. It was the fear of this weakness that caused the humans to suddenly attack the monsters without mercy. It could barely be called a war as not a single human soul was taken, and countless monsters were massacred. The war, like the previous point, also took place centuries ago, as the humans depicted are using swords and spears, indicating that gunpowder isn't commonplace yet. A Tumblr user by the name of Undertale Science dates the initial human we see to the early Middle Stone Age, and the war taking place in the 9th to 11th century, which is indeed centuries ago. They did this by identifying the clothes and weapons in the images showing the war and its outcome as being Celtic in origin from around that time period. Whether this is intentional or if the art just happens to resemble those general designs is up for debate, but the point is, it's likely the intent that the war happened long enough ago that it's faded into legend, with doubts that monsters ever actually existed. In this universe at least. In Deltarune, monsters are shown on the surface with no evidence of any large-scale fighting. In particular, Gerson Boom is known as a historian and writer rather than a war hero. In Undertale, Undyne states that he actually fought in the war, making him centuries old. So if Gerson never fought in a war, it means that the likely point of divergence is that the war never happened in this universe. There's also the theory that monsters won the war, but the problem with that theory is that Chris is explicitly a human that exists on the surface. In addition to that, one of the books you can find in the library in Chapter 2 is a guide for monsters on how to take care of humans, which was last checked out by Toriel years ago, indicating that Chris isn't the only human living on the surface in an entirely monster world. Finally, in Chris's house you can find a book upstairs called The Histories of Humans and Monsters by Gerson Boom. With this divergence established, most of our focus will be on Undertale for the time being, as less is known about the history of Deltarune.
Part 2. The Cave.
The next point on the timeline on the Undertale side of things is the end of the war. Defeated and fearful, the monsters surrendered. 7 of the humans' greatest magicians sealed the remaining monsters underground beneath Mount Ebott with a magic spell. They created a barrier anyone could enter, but nobody could leave. This barrier could only be broken by a power equivalent to 7 human souls. A few monsters living at this point in time are still alive in the present. Gerson participated in the war as previously mentioned by Undyne. Asgore was likely still king back then, as his method for naming things is brought up multiple times throughout history. This means Toriel was likely still queen at that point. This is possible because Asgore and Toriel are a special type of monster called a boss monster. Their souls are strong enough to persist a few moments after death, and they do not age until they have children. As their biological children grow up, they will grow old. The children will stop aging once the parents pass away. Once sealed, the monsters retreated to the furthest end of the cavern, still fearful of human attacks, and settled there. The settlement was eventually named Home because the king was awful at names. The city that was initially built can still be seen in a room off to the right of Toriel's house. Monsters remained there for centuries before daring to leave the ruins.
Part 3. The Angel.
The next point is shared by both universes. Monsters in both worlds at some point discover the symbol known as the Deltarune. It predates written language according to Gerson. In Undertale, it becomes the center of a prophecy for the freedom of monsters, detailing that an angel that has seen the surface will return below, and the underground will go empty. Some more pessimistic monsters interpret that as an omen of death, suggesting that the angel empties the underground by reducing monsters to dust. In Deltarune, the symbol is the basis of the monster religion, with the angel seemingly being the deity that is worshipped. According to Father Alvin, sin and confession are absent in this religion. And that's about all we know. With only 2 chapters out, information on the religion is limited, with most dialogue describing activities that happen in the church rather than the religion itself, such as the choir. Despite predating human language, we can narrow down its discovery to after the monsters were sealed away in Undertale, as the prophecy ascribed to it specifically relates to the monsters being trapped underground. It can be further narrowed down to being discovered during the initial migration to the end of the cavern by the fact that it is carved above certain doorways in the ruins, which are a part of the original monster settlement, Home. This time frame of after the war indicates that the symbols originated from underneath Mount Ebott. Applying this to the divergent timelines means that in order for it to become a religious icon, Mount Ebott is likely close enough to hometown in Deltarune for the monsters to explore it and find the mysterious symbol.
Part 4. Exploration.
You might initially think that Azriel having a room in the old Dreamer house in Home would indicate that he was born before the monsters migrated from the ruins. But the snippets of history you can learn imply monsters moved out much earlier than that. When asking the Snowden shopkeeper about the town's history, she says monsters lived in the ruins, quote, a long time ago, before moving out. The dialogue from the unfinished Undertale alarm clock that Toby Fox posted on the website has sections for each character, and in Asgore's section he mentioned meeting someone at Hotland University. The use of dialogue from a cancelled project may sound dubious to use as canon evidence, but the fact that Toby didn't want that dialogue to disappear and posted it on the official site indicates that it's applicable to the actual game, especially since this particular set of dialogue was a melancholy reminiscence of a friend who had passed away, as opposed to the nonsensical humor of something not to be taken seriously. This monster was in college when Asgore met him, and Asgore knew him long enough for him to have children and then pass away naturally from falling down. Falling down is similar to passing away from old age in humans. A monster falls into a coma-like state called fallen down, and eventually turns to dust. This time frame means the monsters must have moved out far before Azriel was born. I can't narrow down an exact time frame, as nothing outside the ruins looks old or weathered, so I'd speculate maybe a century give or take before modern times. Now for the actual event. No longer fearing further human conflict, the monsters left the ruins to explore the rest of the cavern. According to the Snowden shopkeeper, some fuzzy folk liked the snowy cold climate directly outside the ruins and stayed behind, creating the town of Snowden. Far fewer monsters stayed in the marsh called Waterfall, and far more stayed in the lava-filled Hotland. The bulk settled in the area closest to the barrier's entrance and made the city of New Home. There is no Deltarune equivalent of this event at this point, so we'll move on.
Part 5. Error.
At some point, a monster by the name of W.D. Gaster is appointed to the position of Royal Scientist. It is not known when he took up this position beyond having it before Dr. Alphys. The only creation of his that we know about was made in Hotland, so I'm placing his assignment after the migration, but before everything else. Much about him will be speculation, as there's only 3 sets of dialogue that talk about him at all. He is thought to be a skeleton monster, as he is named after a font like Sans and Papyrus, and the sprite commonly associated with him, labeled in the game files as Mystery Man, resembles a skeleton, if a bit melted. Given that Sans and Papyrus talk in their fonts and dialogue boxes, it is thought that he essentially talks in another language, as evidenced by entry 17, where his dialogue is in Wingdings. Whether or not he's actually speaking another language, or if his font just obscures his word for the player only, is not known. The Wingdings font he uses contains many hand symbols as letters, so he has been connected to the warning the river person can randomly give, stating, "Beware the man who speaks in hands." More evidence than just being a skeleton connects him to Sans and Papyrus. Sans' signature weapon in the No Mercy route is called a Gaster Blaster in the game files, giving a solid connection between Sans and Gaster. If you spare Papyrus on a No Mercy route and examine the box of bones in his room, you will talk about his special attack and how the protagonist would have been blasted away, indicating that his special attack is also a Gaster Blaster, giving him a connection to Gaster as well. Sans' connection to Gaster means the stuff in Sans' secret lab could also be connected to him. For now, we'll only focus on the blueprints and machine. The blueprints are described as being written in unreadable symbols or illegible handwriting, thought to be Wingdings. It's also thought that it could be Alphys' handwriting, as it's also described as barely legible, but this wouldn't make sense if the blueprints are for the broken machine in the room. The machine is hidden under a blanket, so we don't know what it looks like beyond a vague shape. The machine was mentioned once in Toby Fox's Twitter on the topic of people wanting to make the happiest ending possible for the characters. Quote, "You've all seen the happiest outcome. Neither of them could fix the machine, no matter how hard they tried. No one can." End quote. This second person would likely either be Papyrus or Gaster, just based on where the machine is located, and Gaster has the most technical knowledge by far. This machine is possibly alluded to by a couple comments by Sans. In his No Mercy fight, he mentions that he gave up trying to go back a long time ago, and the dialogue after confirms he isn't talking about the surface. During the Azrael fight, when you see him as a lost soul, he states, "You'll never see him again." These pieces of dialogue indicate that Sans wants to return to a life he can't get back to. Toby Fox's comment indicates that the machine being successfully fixed would allow him to go back. This line of reasoning leads to the theory that the skeletons are from another world and ended up trapped here. Another theory suggests that the machine is a time machine and that they came from the future, which would be the reason why Gaster is so far ahead of every other monsters in terms of scientific knowledge. His theme is also present in the sound test room of Undertale. In the game files, the track is named Hymn. This will be important later. Gaster's creation of the core is just as nebulous. One of his many Gaster followers confirms he made the core, but does not elaborate on when it was created. You can only place it after the monster migration, since it was created in Hotland. The core's purpose was to convert geothermal energy into magical electricity for the underground, so we can narrow it down to being made after electricity became commonplace. One thing to note is that in the game, while the core looks high-tech and modern, it also shows signs of age. If you look closely at the bottom of the walls and walkways, you can see that sections of them have broken off and exposed the wiring underneath them. This indicates that while newer than the rest of the buildings of the underground, the core has been there for a while. A theory of mine is that only Gaster knew how to repair the damage to the core, which is why there's so much wear and tear that hasn't been fixed. According to the Gaster followers, he fell into his creation and disappeared, scattered throughout time and space. The creation in question is not specified. Many think the creation is the core, as is the only creation of his we know of. while others think it was whatever was being tested in Entry 17. Speaking of which, Entry 17 is perhaps the most well-known Gaster-related material in the entire fandom. Like everyone else who's ever discussed it, I will do my own reading of it.
Entry 17. Darker, darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps growing. The shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think?
Given to us in Wingdings, Entry 17 gives us a look into how Gaster speaks. Keep note of the very, very interesting. It will also come up later. Whatever experiment this is speculated to be the one that made him disappear, but this is unconfirmed. The fact that this experiment seems to involve darkness and the measure of light has led some to connect Entry 17 to Deltarune, and that maybe the experiment involved creating a dark world. It sounds outlandish, but is theoretically not impossible, as Toby Fox did have the idea for Deltarune before Undertale. As for the two with him, they are speculated to either be Sans and Papyrus or Sans and Alphys. Personally, I think it's Papyrus, as Alphys didn't become in anything royal scientist related until after the position had been vacated for some time. It is speculated that Gaster's disappearance is what led to the Skeleton Brothers suddenly showing up in Snowdin. The sudden loss of friends and family would be cause to start over someplace new. On the Deltarune side of things, we're 99% sure that the entity talking to us in the beginning of the game is Gaster. He talks the same way as in Entry 17, and the background music shares the same leitmotif as his theme in the Undertale files. I ask you to note that Gaster's theme is called Hymn in the files. The background music during the intro sequence is called Another Hymn in the files. There's additional music evidence as well. Gaster's leitmotif appears in the Freedom theme, which is the section of World Revolving that appears in Big Shot, which associates him with the super bosses. This is discussed more in depth by Andrew Cunningham in his video about Gaster's motif in Deltarune, which will be linked below. He also points out that the World Revolving seems to be Gaster's theme extended into a circus boss theme. So we can pretty much say the entity is Gaster, but that's about it. There's not enough to definitively piece together his goals, motives, past, or even appearance just from the available 2 chapters. We can speculate, though. It seems like Deltarune is part of an experiment he's running. I was a bit misleading when I said the takeover of Toby's Twitter account couldn't be treated as part of the game canon. In a literal sense, I think it's unlikely that Gaster taking over a real person's Twitter account to bring attention to the game can be used as lore for him. But I think it's clear from the initial name of the game being Survey Program that he did reach out for volunteers to take part in something. Timeline-wise, we have no info on him other than he exists at the time of the story of Deltarune. There is a point of discussion we can use this to ask, however. Is this Gaster the same one as in Undertale? The previously mentioned broken machine in Sans' lab and the Gaster experiment with something that shattered him across space and time without truly killing him means it's not far-fetched that he could create something that can travel between universes. That's what most people speculate the broken machine did. We can speculate the answer by examining the 2 possible options that come from the answer being yes. The first possibility is that he went from Deltarune to Undertale, presumably using the broken machine. He, Sans, and Papyrus come to Undertale after whatever happens in Deltarune with the machine and become trapped underground when the machine breaks, and he uses his scientific expertise to secure a high-ranking position in this new world, until he disappeared after falling into one of his creations. While there's no real evidence disproving this, there's also no real evidence that they came from Deltarune specifically. Closest thing is in the Papyrus Q&A where he stated that before he moved to Snowdin, he was somewhere with green grass. Grass is only present in 2 patches in the ruins which Papyrus never goes to except in a very specific neutral run. As such, it's speculated that he's referring to hometown in Deltarune. However, because of the non-serious nature of the rest of the Q&A where none of the questions were actually answered as intended, it's just as likely he's referring to the patch of grass he stands on in the Kickstarter material, so even that's iffy. The other possibility is that Gaster went from Undertale to Deltarune. There's a few issues with this. The machine that's thought to travel reality is still in Sans' lab. That would also imply he, and probably Sans and Papyrus, are from an unmentioned third universe. The experiment that made him disappear could have sent him someplace else, but his followers say he was shattered, as in not whole. One follower claims to be holding a piece of him, while another implies that Gaster is listening to the conversation. While shattered across time and space could mean part of him ended up in another universe, it's debatable if there'd be enough of him to do everything he does in Deltarune. Lore-wise, there's no definite issues with either of these, but there is a meta issue with it. The initial concept Toby had for Deltarune didn't involve anything Undertale related. A few things from the first attempt at making it were recycled for Undertale, but the decision to blend the concept with the style of Undertale wasn't made until 2013, when the Undertale Kickstarter was up, as stated in an interview in 2019 with Nintendo. One thing to keep in mind with theory crafting is that we fans analyze a work of fiction with more detail than the creator initially put in. For example, someone who's analyzing Avatar: The Last Airbender could make a theory about whether a waterbender could bend hydrogen and oxygen separately, and the answer would always be unclear because the creators of the show likely didn't think to that level of detail when crafting the magic system. So while either possibility is plausible, it seems unlikely to me that Toby Fox added this character to the game files of Undertale, who doesn't actually exist in the game, that goes to or is from a game he hasn't made yet, that he wasn't sure he could make, that wasn't initially related to Undertale, with the intent that this is his beginning and or end. Except he fucking did. I missed a piece of evidence while writing this section and had to rewrite the entire last page of this section talking about how it probably wasn't the same Gaster across both games. This piece of evidence is the Deltarune website, or rather the fact that it existed earlier than 2018. Deltarune.com existed in 2015 when Undertale launched, and it was nothing but a black screen. If you write the image, it says, "This next experiment seems very, very interesting," in Wingdings. It was updated in 2016 to say, "3 heroes appeared to banish the angel's heaven," also in Wingdings. This means that not only did Toby absolutely plan everything this far back, it implies that it's actually the same Gaster. While not explicit proof, it's enough for me to see it as the most likely option, which I'll be running with at the end of this whole grand theory. To finish this section off, I'm tentatively putting Gaster in the Deltarune timeline as planning his experiment a few years before the events of the game.
Familiar faces.
In this section, we'll finally see the use of parallel timeline theory. We start with the birth of Azrael. In the True Lab, the first videotape you can listen to was one of Asgore and Toriel, who is still pregnant with Azrael. Based on the fact that video camera technology existed at the time of Azrael's birth, and it is established that humans and monsters are roughly around the same technology level, outside of the royal scientist, we could establish that the earliest Azrael could be born is in the 90s. Kara fell at the end of 21X according to the old calendar we can find in New Home. Kara confirms this themselves in the No Mercy route. We don't know Azrael or Kara's ages, and Undertale's art style isn't to scale, so we only know that they are kids. We know they aren't teenagers, so the upper age limit is likely 12, and what little we see of them from the tapes indicate they probably aren't single-digit young. This means our age range for them is 10 to 12 years old. As Azrael and Kara appear to roughly be the same age, 21X minus 10 or 12 means Azrael was born in the early 2000s. The exact year doesn't matter, but for the sake of having an exact mark, I'll use 2013 as the year Kara fell, since that's the year the Kickstarter went up. The average of 10 and 12 is 11, so we subtract that from 2013 to get 2002 as Azrael's birth year for the purposes of this timeline, as well as Kara's. Again, the exact years don't matter as much as the exact time between points on the timeline. Parallel timeline theory means that Azrael and Deltarune was also born in 2002. Chris isn't, as we know for sure. They are the younger sibling. Speaking of, Chris's birth is the next point on the timeline. Figuring out their age compared to Azrael was the thing that started me down this path in the first place. The process is tricky as they don't outright state how much older Azrael is, only that he's in his first year of college while Chris is in what seems like the equivalent of high school. As there are only 2 classrooms being used, it's unlikely either are a specific grade. There's not a lot of mentioning of what the students plan to do after school, so it doesn't feel like a senior year. Temmie mentioned studying to go to college, but it's Temmie and wouldn't be out of character for her to have been saying that for years. Not to mention her interactions are all gags anyway. This indicates that it's junior year at most. This means that there's a 2-year age difference between Chris and Azrael. Therefore, Chris's birth is 2 years after Azrael's on the timeline. If the number turns out to be wrong, it doesn't change what this is leading to. Which is my belief that Fisk's birth is also the same amount of time after Azrael as Chris. This isn't me just saying they're the same person, by the way. I just think they share the same age. Specifically because of Monster Kid. Monster Kid looks to be the same age as the protagonist in both timelines. Parallel timeline theory means that Fisk and Chris are about the same age, and just had their adventures at different points in their life.
Part 7. Siblings.
From here on out, the timelines will share far more mirrored events than previously, starting with Azrael getting a sibling. The next point of the timeline is 2013, as the point Kara fell underground. Prince Azrael found them, and as a result became part of the Dreamer family. I believe at this same point in time in Deltarune, the not royal Dreamers adopted Chris as part of their family, based on the description of a picture on Toriel's classroom computer in Chapter 2. It's a desktop wallpaper. Its desktop wallpaper is you and your brother dressed up for Halloween 8 years ago. It is thought that Toriel picked this specific Halloween picture because it was their first, which would indicate that this is the year Chris was adopted. Azrael, being in his first year of college, would make him 18 or 19 years old. 8 years ago would put him around 10 or 11, which is the same age as his Undertale counterpart when Kara fell. Therefore, the addition of a human to the Dreamer household happens at the same point in both timelines. The only difference is that Chris is 2 years younger than Kara. The next point in time is the death of Azrael and Kara in Undertale. Kara comes up with a plan to free the monsters after seeing the adverse effects buttercup flowers had on Asgore. They would poison themselves, and Azrael would absorb their souls in order to cross the barrier and get 6 more from the humans. Azrael was unable to bring himself to hurt anyone, and the resulting violence from the scared humans resulted in both of them dying. The result of which led Asgore to declare war on humanity. Toriel becomes disgusted with him and leaves. I originally had the incident that resulted in Asgore resigning as police chief as a parallel to this, but I, like many other people, believe this incident is related to December Holiday's disappearance, which I deduced as taking place later in the timeline. Instead, I'll simply note that in Deltarune, the Dreamer siblings remain alive, a simple mirroring of events. This leads to the next point.
Part 8. Hope and Despair.
This is the section of time between Azrael and Kara dying and Fisk falling into the underground. An exact time frame is never mentioned, but most people seem to think it was decades or a century long. Using this theory, I believe it's a lot less. In a timeline where Azrael didn't die, he's 2 years older than Chris. When Flowey turns himself back into Azrael in Undertale, the child form is likely the same age and size as he was just before the incident that killed him. This form also seems to be the same age as Frisk. That means the amount of time since Azrael died is roughly the same as the age gap originally between them, which was 2 years. Or however many years older Azrael turns out to be than Chris. The Undertale side has a lot of events happening in this period. 6 more humans fall down into the underground and have their souls taken. I think the reappearance of a monster in the human town gave credence to the legends around Mount Ebott, which resulted in it being a place where children either ran away in order to not be found, or were dared to climb and explore it by friends. This is why so many humans fell in such a short amount of time compared to how long it took for the first one to fall. It is unknown if Asgore actually killed any of them himself. Calling Undyne in the room you found the valet shoes reveals that they were there before she became captain of the Royal Guard. Other events happen at the same time. Asgore begins training Undyne after she challenges him to a fight and loses. The Royal Scientist position becomes vacant for a long period of time. Alphys meets Metaton at a human fan meeting and becomes intrigued at the robot she's making to impress Asgore. Metaton, as a ghost, wants it as his new body and agrees to pretend that Alphys gave the robot life on her own. This gets her the Royal Scientist position, and Metaton begins his celebrity career. Faced with having to do the job the king gave her, she gets an idea from blueprints of a machine her predecessor left behind. The Determination Extractor. If monster souls could remain after death using injected determination, then they could be used to break the barrier. She creates the machine and Asgore approves the plan. He asks around the underground for monsters who have fallen down, and has their families bring their bodies to the lab. Alphys also takes the first golden flower from the king's garden, and gives it determination. Monsters can't absorb monster souls, so what about something that's neither human nor monster? The flower she experimented on doesn't change, so she puts it back in the garden. The experiment doesn't work. The bodies woke up. They seem fine at first. Alphys tells their families that they're still alive, and then they start melting. They end up melting together into disturbing fusions known as amalgamates. It turns out monsters can't handle determination and lose their form. Alphys halts the experiment, but is too afraid to tell anyone what's happened. She spends time at the dump and meets Undyne, who has become captain of the Royal Guard. They become friends and develop mutual feelings for one another. At the same time as all this, Sans and Papyrus move to Snowdon. Sans gets several sentry jobs while Papyrus tries to join the Royal Guard and receives training from Undyne. The flower comes to life, and Flowey is born with the memories of Azrael. He soon discovers the power of reset, which allows him to reload back into the garden he woke up in. He can do so as much as he wants, even if he dies. This, combined with being soulless and unable to care about anyone, results in his mental deterioration into the cruel entity we see in Undertale. He loses this ability when Frisk falls into the underground. This is because Frisk has more determination than even Flowey. As a result, they have the power of reset now. On the Deltarune side, we have a few similar events. This is likely when Undyne joins the police force and trains under Asgore. The determination experiments don't happen, so all the monsters that fell down in Undertale pass down naturally in Deltarune. Their graves can be found by the church. Mirroring Undertale, Undyne and Alphys never meet during this time. I also want to mention Rudy here. In the Undertale alarm clock dialogue, we learned from Asgore that Rudy passed away before the barrier was broken. I initially thought this was a contradiction in this theory, but it's not. In Deltarune, while sick, Rudy outlived Gerson, who is still alive in Undertale. As far as I can tell, Rudy simply lives longer in Deltarune than he did in Undertale. We may get a better idea why if we find out why he's sick in Deltarune's future chapters. One other important thing happens involving both timelines that I've left out until now, since it's the most important. In Undertale, this is when Gaster disappears, leaving the Royal Science position vacant. I previously determined that it's the same Gaster in both timelines, which means that the experiment he fell into was a portal of some sort. His assistants that were there with him ended up erased from existence, leaving only echoes that appeared under certain fun values. Some parts have been splintered off and remained in Undertale, but his main body and soul arrived in the Deltarune universe. Most fans believe he's hiding in the bunker outside of town. There's a certain sound effect associated with him that can be found playing in this area, albeit slowed down and so faint you can barely hear it, let alone recognize it. I believe this as well, which implies his next actions. Once he gets his bearings, he quietly sets up shop in the old bunker in order to continue his research. This leads to him making plans using the Dark Worlds. I believe he initially studied them in Undertale, which is what Entry 17 is referring to. His full plan will be discussed later.
Part 9. The Undertale and the Overtale.
This finally leads us to something playable. The last human named Frisk falls into the underground in Undertale. Their journey has 3 distinct endings. We'll be using the pacifist ending as the primary one, as Flowey manipulates the human into a pacifist run once they do the neutral run, and a no mercy run ends in the obliteration of the timeline itself. Frisk wakes up and journeys through the underground, befriending the monsters they come across. Unfortunately, Asgore won't let them spare him and reluctantly beat him in battle. They almost manage to spare him once defeated, but Flowey kills them and takes the 6 human souls he was guarding. Omega Flowey is initially more powerful than Frisk, but the human souls are awakened by their cries for help and break free, leaving him powerless. The battle resulted in just the 2 of them ending up outside the barrier. After sparing Flowey, he eventually advises them on how to get a better ending by solving everyone's problems and befriending them. Once Frisk resets, Flowey manipulates various characters and events so that as many monsters as possible end up at the barrier. All the monster souls add up to the equivalent of another human soul. By absorbing them and the human souls, he finally has the power to transform back into his true form, Asriel. Having the souls inside him also means he can feel and care again. Once Frisk forces him to realize this, he stops fighting, as the return of his love and compassion also makes him feel guilt. Now truly being Asriel again, he sheds tears and apologizes for everything. Feeling everyone's desires, he shatters the barrier and releases their souls. This means he'll eventually turn into Flowey again. Frisk gives them a hug before everything goes white. Frisk wakes up outside the barrier room, surrounded by their friends. The barrier is broken, but none of the monsters remember how. Before they leave, Frisk journeys back through the underground to talk to everyone they met. Upon going back to the room they first fell into the ruins, they see Asriel there, tending to the flowers. He is remaining behind, as he'll eventually turn back into Flowey. He says it's not worth the heartache for everyone to see him alive again, just to fade back into somebody else shortly after. He talks about Kara for a while, but Frisk is unable to change his mind. Frisk eventually leaves with their monster friends for the surface. The scenes we see during the credits include one of Asgore being a gardener at Toriel's new school, implying that the monarchy has been dissolved after monsters peacefully integrated with the humans. On the Deltarune side, I believe this is where the incident that resulted in Asgore stepping down took place. My basis for this comes from the theory that this is also the incident where December Holiday disappeared. During the adventure in the cyber world in Deltarune, there's a section where Noelle reminisces about how she, Chris, Asriel, and Des used to go exploring. During this monologue, she passes behind several black screens that only show her outline. The last time it happens, the outline is of her as a child. This indicates that it's likely the age she was when these memories happened. It's also not unreasonable to assume the explorations stopped around this age. The explorations presumably stopped happening because Des disappeared. Therefore, we can assume the incident happened while Noelle was around this age. Additionally, a similar yellow sprite appears when Birdley talks about the spelling bee that started his desire to look intelligent. Noelle freezes up and loses the spelling bee because the word is December, implying that Des is gone already. Both sprites look around the same age and size as Frisk, and I doubt she and Chris would have been taken exploring in the woods if they weren't at least close to being in double digits. If she is the same age as Frisk when Des disappears, then it likely happens at the same time as the playable events of Undertale. Note I keep saying Des disappeared. I don't believe she died. If she did, there would be a gravestone in the cemetery for her. I also think they would have mentioned her more in the conversations we overhear between her and her father if her fate was known. So if she's still alive, what happened? Two possibilities come to mind. One is that she ran away on her own. Their mother is known to be cold and strict, so there's some sort of motivation for it. However, the way Noelle and Rudy talk about Mayor Holiday didn't give the impression that home life was miserable. At least, not enough to willingly leave Noelle behind. The other option is that she was taken or trapped somewhere. The only place we know of where that could have happened is the bunker outside of town. The same bunker I predicted Gaster has taken up residence. This is my personal guess. The last thing the Holiday and Dreamer kids tried to explore is the bunker. It was in disuse and the doors wouldn't open until one of them saw the doors slightly open and told the others, who decided to sneak out and explore it. Des is the bravest and decides to enter first. Asgore caught wind of what they were doing, but didn't immediately leave as he assumed the doors wouldn't open, and that the kids should be allowed to explore and be kids, but is convinced of the danger by the mayor. He rushes to the bunker just as Des steps inside and yells to stop. The kids freeze and Des lets go of the door. Asgore tries to grab her, but the door slams shut behind her and refuses to budge. Des can still talk to them through the door, but they are unable to force the door open. Des decides to go further in to see if there's any sort of door or controls or another way out. Her voice fades away and never comes back. They finally get the door open, but the shelter is empty and Des is nowhere to be found. The circumstances of her disappearance are kept secret from most of the town. Part of the few who do know blame Asgore for not immediately setting out to find them. If he hadn't hesitated, maybe he could have gotten to her in time. Because of this, he decides to resign and give leadership to Undyne. Rudy is one of the few who doesn't blame him and remains friends. Toriel does not, which results in their divorce. Asgore moves into the flower shop he opened, but is too nice to accept payment for most of his flowers and struggles to make rent payments. Even if the specifics are wrong, the general idea parallels Undertale. A child ends up underground, which eventually results in Asgore stepping down from a position of authority and working a horticulture job. With this entry, we've come to the end of the Undertale side of the timeline. There's one or two things we could imply from Deltarune, but the true pacifist ending is the last major thing on that side. All that's left is to use what we put together to fill in the missing pieces of Deltarune.
Part 10. The Night.
The next point on the Deltarune timeline is the creation of the Night. At this time, from what little we know of Gaster in this timeline, he is likely setting up the experiment that will be the story of Deltarune. In order to set up everything, he needs to do things in the town, including making the Dark Worlds. For that, he needs somebody to do it for him, not only to keep his presence secret, but to remain outside the experiment as an observer. That is what the Knight is, a lab assistant. He decides it needs to be someone from the town so that an outside presence isn't suspected. He seals off his lab from the rest of the bunker with a wall that has a hidden door. Once complete, he unlocks the bunker door and awaits for somebody to wander in, before closing the door once they let go. This ends up being Des. When Asgore approaches, Des luckily does let go so he can remotely shut the door without raising suspicion of a third party. Once Des finally wanders further in, he spirits her away through the secret door. From there, he either reveals enough unsettling truths to convince her to help, or forcibly molds her mind into that of the Knight, willing to carry out his will. My theory is that December Holiday is the Knight. She created all the Dark Worlds besides the one Chris makes at the end of Chapter 2. I don't believe Chris is the Knight because of the time frame each of the Dark Worlds were made in. Jaru pointed this out in his video analyzing every single candidate for the Knight. Chris couldn't have made the computer room dark world because dialogue from the Queen implies the dark fountain was only made earlier that day. Chris was either in class or with Susie for all of that. Not to mention, Noelle and Birdley are sitting in chairs once the fountain is sealed, while Chris and Susie are standing at the door where they first jumped in. This implies they were already sitting down when the fountain formed. Examining the closet gives the dialogue that it was big enough to fit a large man, a detail that wouldn't have been mentioned if it wasn't important. Des, as a missing person, could have hidden in there as long as she needed to before creating the fountain. This would also be a narrative way to have Des physically reappear in later Deltarune chapters. With a night candidate determined, it's time to complete the timeline and deduce Gaster's true intentions.
Act 11. Call over the summer.
The next point on the timeline is 2 or 3 years later. Gerson passes away as a famous writer. His son leads the church. Using the theory, we could assume Gerson would also die around this time on the surface in Undertale. Alphys becomes a teacher and takes over his class, though she struggles with it. Fortunately, Toriel is very supportive of her. Asriel begins taking Chris to the diner their family used to go to after church once the divorce happens, until he finally graduates and leaves for college.
Act 12. The Angel's Heaven.
Finally, we reach our last point. In order to fully go through it, we need to put everything together to figure out Gaster's end goal. With the timelines I've laid out, his path is as follows. He and his sons, Sans and Papyrus, travel from another universe and end up trapped in the underground, as the machine they used is permanently broken. His scientific expertise allows him to become the royal scientist. Since he ended up in Deltarune, we could assume that the subject of his experiments is methods of traveling through realities. He is able to continue his work in the underground under the assumption that he is creating a portal to the surface for monsters. Something like that would require a lot of power, so he creates the core with the hidden purpose of powering his inventions. Since he is also credited with making the blueprints for the DT extractor, he also experimented with determination. As creating a dark fountain requires determination, this could lead to entry 17. He experiments with putting determination into weapons, and when he strikes a solid surface with a sharp weapon, he accidentally creates a dark world. Excited, he records an audio entry as smoke billows out and creates a dark world. He asks his sons what they think. As he explores the dark world, he meets Darkners and learns how the fountain works and how the Darkners view Lightners. He realizes that Darkners are toys compared to Lightners, objects given life and history from their use by Lightners. He realizes if the Lightners exist in a higher bubble of reality than Darkners, could a similar bubble of reality exist above their own? His research shifts focus to answering this question and how to reach this reality if it is indeed true. The experiment that makes him disappear is a combination of his portal research and dark worlds. If enough dark worlds are made, they collapse reality around them. Gaster hypothesizes that if he uses his portal technology on the collapsing reality caused by the overload of darkness, then he can create a doorway to a higher reality. When he attempts this, he falls into the portal without intending to. Instead of a higher reality, he ends up in another different universe. From this, he determines that one can't reach the higher plane on their own. If he couldn't get there himself, could he at least reach out and get someone up there to open the door for him? That is what his research is focused on in the bunker. If the Lightners see Darkners as toys and objects, then the Lightners must be the same to the higher beings. If he is to bring one here, then he needs to create a game from the life here to draw them in. He lures in one of the townfolk to help him set everything up without having to reveal his presence. Once his script for the game is done, and he has finished creating the device to reach out, he has his knight create the first dark fountain in the supply closet. and the second in the unused classroom. A certain item is left in the supply closet along with notes containing a prophecy of his creation and information on the consequences of too many dark fountains. This object is meant to be a guide and becomes Ralsei. The knight upsets the balance of the Card Kingdom Dark World and retreats to the bunker for further orders. Gaster also conducts a side experiment. He picks out one Darkner from each world to reveal the truth about reality, in order to observe their attempts to escape from the Light World. If successful, this could be evidence that a Lightner could escape to the Angel's Heaven, as he dubbed it. Similar actions are taken with the Computer Room Dark World. Chris creating a Dark World is unexpected but not unappreciated. It is my grand theory that Deltarune is Gaster's attempt to lure in and connect with a higher being or angel so that he can follow it out once the game is over and its presence is banished. By completing a game and fulfilling the prophecy, the higher being won't get suspicious about being booted from the world and won't notice a passenger. The ending of Deltarune won't change because no matter what, Gaster will always try to follow the player out of the game. Phew. You just sat through 30 pages of Toby Fox content. Thanks for sticking through the whole thing. Like I said at the beginning, this video isn't going to be the norm of this channel. Feel free to point out any contradictions in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe as well, and thank you for watching. I leave you with this riddle. I have the name of a single man and prove your knowledge in a certain subject. What am I? The answer will be posted in the community tab after a set number of days. Goodbye.